everybody, and welcome back to Good Orderly Direction, Practical Tools of the Bible. Today we're discussing Genesis 44 and 45. Joseph reunites with his brothers. We are nearing the end with only 5 chapters left in the book of Genesis. I'm your host, Dr. Dawn-Elise Snipes. So remember, there's a famine. Joseph's brothers come to get grain, and Joseph sends them back, but he gives them all their money back in addition to the grain. So they're worried that they're going to get in trouble for stealing. So they end up coming back and bringing back the money that they had originally paid, plus more money to get more grain when it came time to do that. Joseph again tests his brothers to see if they will sacrifice his youngest brother Benjamin to save their own hides. Joseph gave commands to his household manager. Fill the men's sacks with as much food as they'll hold and put each man's silver cup at the top of his sack. Put my cup, the silver cup, on top of the youngest brother's sack together with the silver for his grain. The manager did just as Joseph told him to do. At dawn, the men and their donkeys were sent off. They had left the city but hadn't gone far when Joseph said to his household manager, "Get ready and go after the men and catch up with them. Ask them, 'Why have you repaid my hospitality with ingratitude? Isn't this cup my master drinks from and uses to discover God's plans? What you've done is despicable.' They replied, 'Your servants would never do such a thing. The silver that we found in our sacks we brought back to you.' The manager said, 'Fine. Whoever has the cup will be my slave, and the rest of you will go free.' Everyone quickly lowered their sacks. The manager searched the oldest first and the youngest last. The cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Judah fell to the ground before Joseph and said, 'What can we say to my master to prove we are innocent? God has found your servants guilty. We are now your slaves, all of us, including the one found with the cup.' Joseph said, 'I'd never do such a thing. Only the man found with the cup will be my slave. As for the rest of you, you are free to go back to your father.' Judah approached him and said, 'Please, my master, allow your servant to say something. You asked about our father and brother. We were honest. We brought him to you. If we return without him, it will surely kill our father. I guaranteed the young man's safety to my father, telling him, if I don't bring him back to you, it will be my fault forever. Now please, let your servant stay as your slave instead of Benjamin.' So this is sort of an interesting turn of events. Back when they had sold Joseph into slavery, they thought nothing of the dagger that they plunged into their father's heart. But now they're prepared to accept bondage if that may save their father. So that's interesting. They've gone from being immature and self-centered to really being compassionate for their father and caring about what happens to him. They also have started to realize the impact of their actions. My guess is back when they sold Joseph, they were much younger and they were much more immature in their understanding of the world and the effects of their actions. But as a result of seeing the toll it took on Jacob when Joseph disappeared, they started to recognize that actions do have consequences. In this part of the story, we're recognizing that forgiveness does not necessarily mean forgetting or even necessarily reconciling. Joseph has forgiven his brothers, but he's still testing them. He's not necessarily ready to reconcile with them, and he's certainly not going to forget what they've done. He's choosing not to stay angry about it, but he's being prudent in his actions with them to, number one, make sure he doesn't get taken advantage of again, but also trying to protect his brother and ostensibly his father. Forgiveness means choosing not to tie up energy, continuing to brood over something you can't change. However, before reconciling, it's always prudent to ensure the other person is remorseful and is actually changed. there's two things there. Not just being remorseful. You can be sorry for what you did, but if you keep doing it, then that's a problem. And in order to protect yourself from being betrayed again, it's important to make sure that the person feels bad for what they did or acknowledges what they did and are remorseful for it, and that they won't do it again. Otherwise, you have to make sure that you put safeguards in place to protect yourself. Joseph could no longer control himself, so he said, "Everyone leave now." No one stayed with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers. Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold to Egypt? Now, don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves that you sold me here. God sent me before you to save lives." So Joseph has forgiven them, and he has used something called cognitive dissonance to get through the hard times. Cognitive dissonance is when what's happening and what we want to happen or expect to happen don't jibe. So since what was happening didn't jibe, Joseph tried to figure out, okay, why might this be happening? What explanation can I find so it makes sense in my life? So when you reconcile cognitive dissonance, you are making sense out of something that is inexplicable. "Hurry, go back to your father," Joseph said. "Tell him that God has made me master of all of Egypt. Then come down to Egypt and don't delay. You may live in the land of Goshen, so you'll be near with me. You will be near me, your children, your grandchildren, your flocks, your herds, and everyone else with you." Joseph not only is trying to protect them and trying to protect his father, but he's saying, you know what? I want you to come back. I want to spend time with you. I want to reconnect with you. I want to be able to love you. I want to create this environment. Interestingly, when Pharaoh's household heard that Joseph's brothers had arrived, both Pharaoh and his servants were pleased. Now remember, Pharaoh's an Egyptian and Joseph is an Israelite. So theoretically, the two of them are somewhat at odds. But you can see that the Pharaoh has developed great compassion and respect for Joseph, even though Joseph is different. Joseph has different beliefs than the Pharaoh does. Remember, the Egyptians were a polytheistic society. They had multiple gods. Joseph had the God of his father. And however, the two of them learned to work together, and the Pharaoh developed respect and compassion. And that is such a great lesson that we can take with us. Joseph behaved prudently and earnestly. He did his very best. He was truthful and respectful to the Pharaoh. All of these things that we keep talking about in good, orderly direction. The Pharaoh began to respect him and became his ally instead of his adversary. So the Pharaoh and his servants were pleased and said to Joseph, "Tell your brothers, load your animals and return home. Bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land." Wow. So that's a huge statement. The Pharaoh is saying, bring your family, bring all these Israelites here, and I will make sure that they live out their days in comfort. That is quite a blessing and quite an honor to be coming from the Pharaoh. Joseph's brothers left Egypt and returned home. They told Jacob, "Joseph is still alive. He's actually ruler of all the land of Egypt." Jacob's heart nearly failed, and he didn't believe them. Then he said, this is too much. My son Joseph is still alive? Let me go and see him before I die. Jacob packed up everything he owned and offered sacrifices to his father Isaac's God. Now this is important because all of a sudden, everything that Jacob knew to be true, Joseph supposedly died, all of a sudden it's like, no, actually he didn't die after all. This feels like a miracle, but Jacob is likely somewhat suspicious and cautious and wary about, is this too good to be true? Many second thoughts must have made him hesitate. He would remember the promise from Genesis 15:13 that the descendants of Abraham were to be reduced to slavery and suffer affliction in a foreign land for 400 years. Okay, well, there's that. It's important to also recognize that even when things appear to be exactly what we want, we should seek counsel, assistance, and a blessing from God. We need to step back and use prudence, use our wisdom and our patience, not just jump in blindly, but go, all right, this looks really good, but is it actually really good? We need to use courage, and we need to use respect and truthfulness with ourselves as well as others. We need to be honest with ourselves about, is this really the right thing to do? When we use all the characteristics of good orderly direction, it helps us make much sounder decisions. And when we do so, then we potentially receive what Christians would refer to as a blessing from God. We receive the go-ahead. When you know in your head, your heart, and your gut that, yeah, okay, this is probably a good move, then that's what you're looking for instead of just acting impulsively. God said to Jacob in a vision at night, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "I'm here." God said, "I'm El, the mighty one, your father's God. Don't be afraid to go down to Egypt, because I will make a great nation of you there." Joseph hitched up his chariot and went to meet his father Israel, or Jacob, in Goshen. When he arrived, he threw his arms around his neck and wept, embracing him for a long time. Jacob said to Joseph, "I can die now after seeing your face. You really are still alive." So Jacob, who's also called Israel, was very, very relieved and happy to see his son, who he thought he had lost so many years ago. Joseph said to his family, "Let me inform Pharaoh, my brothers and my father's household have arrived. They are shepherds, and they have brought with them their flocks and herds and everything they own. When Pharaoh summons you and says, 'What do you do?' say, 'Your servants have owned livestock since we were young, both we and our ancestors, so that you will be able to settle in the land of Goshen, since the Egyptians think that all shepherds are beneath their dignity.'" Now remember, I said that the Pharaoh had said, "Bring your family. They can live in the lap of luxury. You have done so much that I want to reward your family." But Joseph stepped back and said, "Thanks, but how about let's let them stay out in Goshen?" The Egyptians didn't want to go out to Goshen. They didn't want to farm. They didn't want to shepherd animals. They wanted to do what they did in the city. So there was no jealousy there. There was no risk for Joseph's family for retribution or for jealousy from the Egyptians, because he didn't take advantage of his place. He was very selfless and meek in what he did. He brought his family close, but he kept them where they were comfortable and allowed them to live out their life in a content place. They didn't need to have all the luxury. He just wanted them to be close. So this story provides for us the principles of forgiveness, which we keep seeing between Joseph and his brothers. He forgives. He's not holding on to anger, but he's approaching the reunification very methodically in order to make sure that he doesn't get blindsided by them again. Earnestness. Both Joseph and his brothers were acting in good faith. They were doing their best to uphold the law. They were doing their best to fulfill their commitments. And compassion. We see compassion for Jacob from Judah. We see compassion for the brothers and for Jacob from Joseph. We see compassion going all over the place. We even see compassion and, dare I say, selflessness from the Pharaoh to Joseph and his family. The Pharaoh is grateful and compassionate And instead of saying, well, I'm the Pharaoh and I'm an Egyptian and you're lowly Israelites, he says, bring them on. I want to make sure that they receive the benefits that they deserve. So this is a really interesting story that I think we can learn a lot from in terms of the benefits of putting aside our differences and finding our common ground, and how prudence and earnestness and respect and truthfulness and selflessness and compassion can all work together so beautifully to unite factions that normally probably wouldn't know one another.